Good afternoon, and welcome to this month's Young Leaders Circle event with Congressman Dan Crenshaw, the author of the excellent new book, Fortitude, American Resilience in the Era of Outrage. Congressman Crenshaw was just reelected to his second term in the House of Representatives from Texas's 2nd Congressional District, but his service to our country precedes his time in elected office. He served in the United States Navy as a Navy SEAL, completing 5 tours of duty, reaching the rank of lieutenant commander and earning many distinctions for his bravery and sacrifice. Though he is only in his second term in the House, Congressman Crenshaw has emerged as one of the most visible members of the House and an important voice in conservative politics. Congressman, thanks so much for joining us today.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Congressman Crenshaw, you represent a kind of classic conservative district in the House. It's a suburban district, but it's also a district that is increasingly diverse. It's the kind of district that Democrats have been targeting in Texas and in districts around the country. And I'm curious, you actually won your district in 2020 by a bigger margin than you did back in 2018. What is it that you did in this district? How is the district changing? And why is it that your brand of conservatism is proving so appealing, whereas in other Texas suburban districts, it seems that voters are looking for an alternative?
Yeah, that's true. So there's a lot of things to unpack there and to analyze. I wish we had the data right now about who voted where and what and why. We're gathering that now. But we actually doubled our margin of victory. In 2018, won by 7 points and now by 14 points. And another thing to point out is outperformed the president by 12 points. He won the district by 2 points. I won it by 14. So what does this tell you? First of all, I am not known for being quiet about my beliefs, right? I'm known for fighting a lot of different battles on the culture war front, on many different policy issues. I don't stick to one lane. So, okay, so it's not as if people are looking for some conciliatory figure, right? Somebody who just stays quiet and only talks about, the county fair. Okay, that's not the kind of congressman I am. Everybody knows that. And so that doesn't account for the difference either. I think what the lesson is this: fight for conservative principles. You can be a Republican, an unapologetic Republican, and you can be rewarded for it. People just want you to fight a certain way. All right. And that means you don't need to insult the character of people. You don't need to take cheap shots. You need to be dignified, but you need to have an opinion and explain to people why you have that opinion. And it's okay to have strong opinions as long as you can reason your way to those opinions with some facts, evidence, and rational thought processes. And I think we were rewarded for it, to be honest. And it also tells you this: look, Texas didn't turn blue. I mean, at all. The Texas State House, this big target, I think $100 million was spent on Texas State House races. Bloomberg alone spent $100 million in Florida, I think Georgia, and Texas. A lot of money came in to flip it. Nothing flipped. So what does that tell you? It tells you, listen, people actually like the message of limited governance. They actually like their lower taxes. They like their energy jobs. They like a strong border. Just the basics, right? We want a basic, free, limited government, pro law enforcement, law and order kind of society where we can pursue our happiness and have some predictability about what's going to happen. Not some big, giant, sweeping progressive program that's going to upend our way of life. This is generally what people want. I think America is still a center-right country. I think Texas is certainly a center-right state.
Congressman, in the 116th Congress, there were 27 veterans of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. There are even more recent veterans serving in state offices. Do you believe that there's something that unites veterans of the war on terror, something that contributes, that could serve as a potential foundation for bipartisan cooperation?
It's always a question. And the answer is, I don't know. It always depends on the person. I don't think you can generalize these things. I wish you could. I maybe used to say that you could, but I've been proven wrong too many times. So I've stopped saying that. And it just depends on the individual. And it's certainly a starting point. I'll say that. It's definitely a starting point. But But after that, it depends on too many other factors, whether it's policy differences or just character differences. I'll always, but it's certainly a starting point. I can always at least look to a fellow veteran and at least start there. Now, I'll just, in my experience, more often than not, it goes nowhere and it even ends up backfiring. But it doesn't mean that there's at least not a starting point, which is
without naming names. Tell us more about that. Is it that just the ideological cleavages are deeper? Is it just that ultimately comes down to what is in your kind of intellectual DNA as to kind of what you believe is the right course of action, and that swamps the shared experience of sacrifice for country?
I just think for some people, and I'll name names, Max Rose, Seth Moulton, I think for some people, their political opportunism took precedent over any sense of camaraderie or honest debate. That's what happened in at least two cases. Max Rose, just as we were becoming friends, talking about things we could work on together in the counterterror space, things that we agree upon, he decided to come after me for no reason. Making up literally making up stories or spreading made up stories about me. Seth Moulton lying about what I said right in the middle of a committee hearing, just out of nowhere, right? They throw the first punch, and so I finished the fight. That's how I roll. But it was disappointing, to say the least, because what I expect from veterans and who share this commonality is honest debate. I do not expect agreement. What I expect is honest debate, and sometimes that's what you get, and sometimes it's not.
Congressman, you're a very active and effective user of social media. I think we can all see why. You're not one to pull your punches. Your Instagram and Twitter feeds provide you a lot of direct access to the American people. How do you think about social media as a tool in political communication? And do you think that it's been entirely positive as a tool, or tell us a little bit about the pluses and the negatives?
Certainly a tool. I mean, I view it as a positive. Do I suspect throttling at times, especially on Twitter? Yeah, absolutely. But I still prefer the existence of it. I still need it, because how else do I get my voice heard? How else do we reach so many people? So listen, it's a double-edged sword. There's, many would argue correctly so, that social media has driven the polarization that we've seen in our society. It's made us more brittle. It's made us more mean. To understand why, it's the anonymity of it. It's the same reason you say terrible things about the person who cuts you off on the highway. You do. But you never say that to them, to their face. And social media operates the same way. And so this has created a very mean society. We need to learn how to deal with this better. It doesn't mean you erase it. We need to learn how to deal with it better. And we need to apply the standards of the First Amendment as they are written in law to social media. Now, how we do that from a legal perspective is up for debate, right? Maybe it's Section 230. That's a whole separate conversation. But these social media companies, I believe, have a duty to adhere to the spirit of the First Amendment. This would alleviate so many concerns that people have with respect to social media, and allow us to use it as the tool that I think it has the ability to be.
So this is a domain where you believe that some regulation would be appropriate. Is that fair to say?
Well, it's unclear on what that looks like. They're forcing us into this position. They really are. Maybe it's Section 230 would basically say, all right, if you want to act like a publisher, then now you can be sued like a publisher. Okay, so it's not necessarily regulating it; it's just opening it up to liability, which might be the fair thing to do. You might also argue in the court of law that free speech rights trump private property rights, and you could argue that, because that has Supreme Court precedents, and you could argue that same logic applies to social media as well. So without adding it, because conservatives are wary of adding regulations to this, because the regulations can be reversed, and Democrats are very clear about why they don't like social media companies. They don't like them because they don't censor enough. We have an entire political party that is completely against the First Amendment. That should scare the hell out of Americans, and I think more people need to realize what's going on here. They actively argue that social media companies should censor more. That's an appalling thing. So it seems like everybody is united in being mad at social media companies, but we have completely different reasons for doing so.
You're often described as a generational voice. How do you see millennial conservatives and millennial Republicans as different from older conservatives and Republicans, if at all? Do you believe that essentially they're the same, with the same ideological sensibilities, or do you believe that there is some meaningful cleavage that is going to contribute to some larger change in our politics?
Well, the general disposition of a conservative does not change. It's kind of the whole point of being a conservative, right? So it is a framework by which to solve problems, a framework driven by limiting principles, right? A series of questions about what government can and should do. This is conservatism fundamentally. It's a process-oriented philosophy, whereas progressivism is an outcome-oriented philosophy. The process doesn't matter to them. They'll change the rules of the race if they don't like who's winning. So this is a fundamental dispositional difference between the two sides. As far as generational conservatives, there's clear differences too. Younger conservatives are going to care more about the environment. They're going to care more about legalizing pot. It's just true. It's just always like what a young Republican platform is. They're not going to be as concerned with gay marriage and things like that. They're going to be more open to those ideas. So in general, just a little bit more libertarian leaning. Frankly, is what you see from young conservatives. I would also say the way we reach young conservatives and also turn people to conservatism, and what I try to do is simply explain what we're talking about. Don't talk. Young people do not like to be spoken to in slogans and talking points. They in the age of the internet, we find that to be unconvincing. As a voter, this is why I do what I do, because I remember being a voter. And it felt to me like you were trying to manipulate me if you spoke to me in talking points. It was too obvious to me what you were doing. You weren't backing up what you were saying. You weren't telling me why you even reached this conclusion. And so I'm always trying in a minute or less to at least give you that extra layer or two. 5 minutes is too much, right? And so you got to play with the reality of social media and know how long people actually watch your videos and digest your content. And so I work at it a variety of ways. It's for really in-depth commentary. You go to my podcast, right? For the least in-depth commentary, you go to my Twitter, and there's a spectrum in between.
So, is it your sense that there are people who are simply not reachable by that kind of appeal to limited government? That there's some people who are really dug in their heels in their commitment to a larger state? Or do you try to see it as everyone is persuadable, provided you approach them with the right message? You approach them in a way that is not necessarily using abstract language, but making a very practical case? Or is it just the reality that there's some people who are just not going to be available to you?
Yeah, of course. Some people are definitely not available to you. It'd be idealistic to believe otherwise, and naive. Some people actively will tell you they want more. They want higher taxes and they want a bigger government role in their lives. They believe in this notion that government is there to shape humanity, to shape human nature, to shape the culture. So we have very fundamental disagreements with these people. Again, it goes back to what I said before about the dispositional differences between liberals and conservatives. We are wired differently. There's a lot of people in between that don't really fall into either category. They're the persuadable ones.
There is a lot of anxiety about the fact that when you're looking at millennials and Gen Z, it does seem as though there is this marked shift to the left. And I wonder, is that something that is time limited as people get older, as they climb the economic ladder, as they take on new responsibilities? Is that something that you expect will change? Or do you think that that is just something that's really baked in and that's going to be hard to reverse?
It's a problem. What I don't know, I wish I did, was the data from the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s on what was the difference that stark back then also. I just don't know the answer to that. It's the problem is it's unlikely that somebody starts to change their vote when they grow older. There's this myth that, hey, once you start paying taxes, you become a conservative. I mean, it's true sometimes, but it's just not true all the time. And you can't rely on that. You've got to message to young people sooner. And the reason that there's this huge difference is because we haven't. Trump in particular is very unpopular with young people. So, a lot of young people who are not politicos, who don't really, I think, take a hard look at the policy platforms and how it might affect their lives. They really just see the leaders of each party, and it's a likability issue. So there's not much more analysis than that. People are shallow in this sense. I just like that person, and boom, I'm a Democrat. That's it. So we just have to be likable to an extent. That's why I do a lot of things I do. That's why we put out videos like Texas Reloaded. This makes us approachable and likable and cool. It shows that we're not just a bunch of old white guys. So you got to be relatable. You've got to show that you are relatable to them in this generation, and bring them on board accordingly.
We have a question from a member of the audience, question from Amelia. Congressman Crenshaw said classic conservatism is still appealing in Texas. Does he think the president's willingness to stray from Reaganism contributed to his overperformance in the Midwest? And how should that impact conservative policymaking going forward?
Yeah, well, first we have to define what the differences are between, Reaganism and Trumpism. And I would probably define them as Trumpism is much more skeptical of laissez-faire free trade, and much more friendly to the old union worker, and because of that, and I think that's directly related to a tough on China kind of stance. Trump is much harder on border security than Reagan ever was, but that's also highly predictable, right? The problems are different. So we're kind of comparing apples and oranges here. Yeah, Trump is obviously much more of an isolationist than Reagan was. Again, we're a little bit comparing apples and oranges because you're talking about two people in two different times. You've got Trump is really just being a populist in that sense. He's just looking at public opinion and saying that's my opinion. So is there? So I guess what I'm kind of saying is there's not enormous differences. To be honest, there's really just not. In style, there's huge differences, but in true policy platforms, there's not. The free trade stuff is truly debatable. Republicans need to have that debate internally, to be honest. It is not obvious now that pure free trade, letting China take advantage of us, is a good thing. You might be able to measure it in the aggregate as being beneficial, but when entire towns are being destroyed in America, no, it's not a good thing, and we need to be honest about that. So it's not. So so let's define it, right? And then the second part of the question was okay. So well, I think that answers the second part of the question. Why did he do so well in the Midwest? Because now he's talking to this working class citizen. We need to keep them in the Republican Party. Culturally, these blue collar workers are with us on a cultural level, right? They don't like all the woke progressivism of the left. They think it's nuts, and they're right. So they identify with us better. They like the American flag. All right. So that's the Republicans. Unfortunately, that just happens to be true these days. And then on a policy note, we've got to speak to them. Look, I want an economic future that is good for the American worker and American prosperity. And so we tell them how we're going to do that. I want more trade skill training. I want more vocational training and apprenticeships, and less of this cultural push towards wasting all your money on a 4-year degree in basket weaving or some other silly degree. And we want to be tough on China. We want to be tough on trade. We want to be tough on the border because we want to protect your jobs. We don't want to just undercut your jobs with flooding it with immigrant labor. So this used to be a Democrat policy, right? I mean, Bernie Sanders used to be really big on this. Now it's a Republican policy, and I think it's a smart one, right? You got to have some balance there. I think lastly, we say, look, the whole point of supporting businesses and trying to cut taxes for corporations, it's not to line the pockets of the rich fat cats, okay? And I know what that's Democrats say, but in reality, what happens is it causes more investment, which causes a tighter labor market, which means your wages go up. And now we have proof of this because we had 4 years of it under this administration. Well, 3, pre-COVID. 3 years of proof that show when you engage in these free market policies, wages go up, and they go up the highest and the fastest for the lowest earners. So this works. It works, and we have proof of it, and we got to keep doing it.
You spent time as a young person living outside the US and Latin America. How did that international or comparative perspective shape your understanding of American politics and society? And did it influence your views on any policy issues, including, for example, immigration?
Yeah. Let me answer that last question first. It's fascinating because it influenced my views a lot in the sense of assimilation, and which I guess is related to immigration. I was expected to learn Spanish. So let me say, I went to high school. I did my entire high school in Bogota, Colombia. Very few Americans were in my high school. Maybe there was no other Americans there for all 4 years. A couple Americans came in and out. There's a lot more Americans now, but back then in 98 to 2002, it was dangerous. We had an armored car. I mean, it was quite the life. So not a lot of expats. And I was fully immersed in that culture. I had to learn Spanish. I ended up in Spanish classes with Colombians, just challenging to say the least. But they helped me through it. And I just embraced the culture. It would never dawn upon me that culture owed me anything, that they owed me the ability to be an American in their country. No, you come to their country to be in their country. And so I expect the same when people come here. Become an American. The wonderful thing about this country is that you can become an American, but becoming an American does mean something. It doesn't mean setting up your own little country in America. That's multiculturalism. So when we define multiculturalism, that's what it is, right? It's being your own country inside of another country. That's not okay. Okay, we're a melting pot, not a multicultural society. Very big difference. A salad bowl versus the melting pot analogy. And the salad bowl is unsustainable. It causes conflict and divisiveness. And if you don't believe me, there's Harvard sociology studies that would prove this as well. There's no benefit to extra diversity in a community. In fact, it's bad. Okay, on all measures. So this is just a practical truth. Assimilation is good, and we want people to assimilate, right? This is a country that welcomes immigrants, as we should. But we have to talk about what it means to become American. That's what we mean by national identity. And now the left accuses us they attribute all sorts of awful things to us when we talk like this, right? They call us racists and xenophobes, and this is. But generally, when you're name calling, it's a good indication you have no argument. So, but it's also just false. What we argue for is a sustainable society, and frankly, the people who come here legally want that too. I think that's why Trump gained votes in the Latino community and immigrant communities. It's actually not a surprise at all. I think Republicans are on track to gain a lot more because, as it turns out, people who vote came here legally, and they realize that there should be a line. And that there should be a system, and they're proud that they went through that system, and it kind of pisses them off when people cut in that line. And I think we can speak to those concerns.
Has that been part of your strategy in your own congressional district, given that it has a good-sized immigrant population? Have you engaged in active outreach to those communities of naturalized citizens?
Yeah, I mean, I do ads, and I speak Spanish, so I do ads in Spanish. We don't. I didn't hit not on this election because it just wasn't a big topic this election. It was much of a bigger topic last election. I ran on border security and these issues last election, and I was one of the most outspoken people during the border crisis. So people know where I'm at on this, right? It's no secret. My talking points are not secretive at all. I don't have the data on how we did with Hispanics. It's also hard to tease out Hispanics necessarily, just because you're really just looking at a last name, and doesn't that could mean a lot of things. So, but Venezuelans are a big part of our community in Houston. I have my family used to live in Venezuela. I've been there many times. Venezuelans know what socialism is. They're very aware of these issues. Houston's the most diverse city in America. People don't realize this. So, we speak to a lot of different communities, and they, and my message apparently works because, like I said in the beginning, we doubled our margin of victory.
In your book, you make an argument about the relationship between national character and self-government. You share the great John Adams quote, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people." it is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. This is an idea that's been central to a lot of conservative thinking for some time. Are you pessimistic about the state of American character?
Yeah, I am. That's why I wrote a book, to try and hopefully correct it. The essence of my book was to correct this bad trend. And it was unfortunately worse than I thought. So, the essence of that quote is, look, freedom is great, but it's not hedonistic freedom. It's not what we're going for. We're going for ordered liberty. And by ordered liberty, we mean everybody has to live with a set of responsibilities and duties. Duty is a very important part of being a citizen. Citizenship. We talk about rights all the time. I have a right to this. I have a right to that. No, those aren't rights. Those are services that you want. And everybody likes to talk about those, but we need to be talking about our responsibilities as citizens. Key difference. And one trend is sustainable when we talk about our responsibility as citizens. The other trend, when we're only talking about what is owed to us and calling that rights, these are not rights. These are just services, like I said. If you're only talking about that, then this is an unsustainable proposition. This is a trend that will end in decay, corruption, divisiveness, bitterness, resentment towards one another, and the taking of those who have and those who produce, and the redistribution to those who do not want to produce, until there is nothing left. That's what socialism ends up in. But that socialism starts. That's the end state. But it starts with this fundamental problem in how we think about the purpose of government, whether it's there to serve us things from other people, or whether it's there to simply provide a set of rules that we act responsibly within.
You observed earlier on that there are many continuities between what you might call Trumpism and Reaganism. There are different contexts. Many things about the world have changed, and you'd expect politics to change in response. But it does seem like there are some differences, and I think this question from Tim gets at that a bit. What about the idea that Americans want conservative rhetoric and operational liberalism? Florida went for the president, but voted to raise the minimum wage by a healthy margin. Is that a concern for substantive conservative policy goals?
Well, in that example in particular, I'm not in Florida, hard to speak to what the argument on either side. Conservatism would argue that it is up to the state or localities to deal with minimum wage laws. So, fine if they want to do that. That's what I've always argued. Again, if you want a minimum wage law in my own county, I'll still say, keep it at zero. But at least I know that's where the argument should happen. So the counterpoint to that point is, in California, they overwhelmingly voted for Democrats, but overwhelmingly voted against all of the propositions, the progressive propositions. So, I think maybe the lesson is that it depends on the issue, and Americans, I think Americans are still center right. And for minimum wage in particular, the conservative proposition is that it's decided at the state level, not the federal level. The federal level should have no minimum wage.
Question from Julia. The congressman is a graduate of an elite college and graduate school. Does he think he has a better understanding of the cosmopolitan liberal view because of this experience? Does he think there are any insights to be gleaned from that style of thinking?
Yeah, my whole life, frankly, has been in that liberal bubble. Whether it's in the elite international schools as growing up, I had a lot of my Colombian classmates. I'm not really sure you put them in a liberal or conservative bubble, necessarily. But
are you still close with any of them? Just out of curiosity, yeah. Do you keep in touch?
Yeah. And speaking of liberal, I went to Tufts. I probably keep in touch with one friend from Tufts. I keep in touch with a lot of friends from high school. So I have no friends from college. But yeah, so I went to Tufts and I went to Harvard. These are not conservative bastions by any stretch. And then I lived in San Diego. And then, the military is obviously wired more conservatively when you're in the military, but we don't discuss politics. And nobody knows anything about politics, really. You're focused on your job. So not exposed to it hardly at all. I came to conservatism. Well, I think I was wired that way anyway. And then I came to the philosophy and the ability to speak through it more clearly and all the policies behind it over time, right? It's revealed to me as I look at issues, and I'm like, well, the conservative think tank seems to actually explain it and address the point, whereas these others don't. They simply don't. I think the left side almost always has extremely shallow reasoning and does not directly confront the counter arguments. This is a problem. This is a problem. This is the big blind spot with liberalism. There is this belief that there are no trade-offs. It's a huge blind spot. It means that it's not even a proper governing philosophy, frankly. It means that it's utopianism fundamentally when you argue that there are no trade-offs, right? We're seeing it right now with the lockdowns. There's no trade-offs. You're just saving lives. They don't even care. They won't even acknowledge the massive trade-offs of lockdowns. And I think this is prevalent basically with every single left-wing policy. It's utopianism. It's dangerous. It's not a proper governing philosophy. It's simply outcome-based. They simply want things, and they believe that if you create a law to want things, and if you say that you care a lot, then it solves problems. But this is not true. There are no solutions. There are only trade-offs. And honest people in government understand that. I believe that's what conservatism is all about. So, and to answer your question more directly, I often wonder the same thing, and I'll ask them how they feel about these things. And what I always find, and every single time, is I'm never surprised by the answers that somebody on the left gives me. That's unfortunate. I'm always looking to be surprised. I'm always looking to think like, maybe you're going to tell me what I just don't understand. Maybe you're finally going to reveal to me the thinking behind this. Has never happened. It's never happened once. What happens all the time is I can make their facial expression surprised. I can make them go, oh, that's amazing. It just shows that like they have no idea what we think. They have no idea what conservatives think. I found this out to be the case at Harvard to an exceptional extent. They have no idea what conservatives think. It makes debating the left very easy. So I encourage conservatives you just got to do a little bit more research. Okay. And this is where we fail sometimes, right? We rely on our slogans and our activists, and if you just do some work, you can always win the debate. It's because I promise you, they don't know what you think or why you think it, but you've got to know what you think and why you think it too. Okay. If you're going to win that debate.
So speaking of which, you expressed earlier on some concerns about the state of American character. Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan said, the central conservative truth is that it is culture, not politics, that determines the success of a society. So far, very much in line with what you've been saying. Then he said, the central liberal truth is that politics can change a culture and save it from itself. Do you buy that? Can politics change a culture? And do you think that is what most conservatives want from government right now? A government that can address some of these deficiencies of character to reverse some of this cultural decline?
Yeah, I read that quote. It's very insightful. I agree with the quote. I think that's a very insightful difference between liberals and conservatives and how we view government. Okay, so that's where I'll start. Conservatives do believe that the culture matters the most, and that it's government's job to simply lay some boundaries down and some incentive structures to allow good moral people to operate within an ordered liberty. Liberals don't necessarily believe that. They do believe that it's the government's job to shape human nature and to shape the culture, right, into their ideal. Now, the problem is, the fundamental blind spot there is like, well, what constitutes the good ideal? Because they don't like religion. So what is it? Like, what is this absolute truth that we're aspiring to? This is a problem. This is a real problem. And what it turns out is that it ends up being based on the kind of the political whims of the time, the progressive, whatever's in vogue. That's a real problem. Okay, but the next question you asked was, okay, are conservatives falling into that trap too? A little bit. There is a push because we see our culture falling away so much, right? Like our educational institutions are teaching crazy things. And we're like, okay, do we need to now confront our own principles of limited government in order to save our culture? That's a legitimate question. It is a legitimate question. And I don't know how to answer it, right? It certainly depends on the issue at hand, because as soon as you take that step, well, it does open the door for the left to really take the step further next time you lose the election. So we need to be very careful about how we think about these things. And my preference is still to fight the culture wars on the cultural front. This is what I do. Again, it's why I read a book. It's why I do social media. It's why I go to campuses. Like you've got to fight the culture wars within the culture. It's not obvious that you can fight it from a legal standpoint. Laws generally follow the movement of the culture anyway. Rarely are they in front of it, and rarely should they be. So it's an honest question. It's a good question. I still default to fight those battles in that front of the culture.
So one way of thinking about your role in elected office is that you are a public servant. You are fighting to keep government limited, to keep government in its lane. But then in order to affect the kind of cultural changes you want to see, that's going to have to be not people in government necessarily, but you've got your little platoons, you've got voluntary organizations, you've got a range of other things. I'm curious, do you worry that there's too much energy going towards winning elections than towards nourishing the kind of culture that you want to have? That is going to be a culture of self-reliance, the kind of character that you want to see in younger Americans for the future?
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. A message I give to young Americans all the time is don't be bought off by false promises. Right? It's a very simple line. Don't be bought off by false promises of services, of giving you things, this notion that the government is there to end all your suffering and make your life a living utopia. No, only you can do that, right? Our declaration is very clear. Our declaration is a statement of why government exists. It doesn't say it will give you happiness. It says to pursue your happiness. You have the freedom to do that. That's what government is there to protect. So and I think that's a pretty intuitive statement. Most Americans still agree with this notion. Your more progressives will say, yes, but I can't be free if I don't have healthcare, right? Okay, fine. You can't convince, these people are unpersuadable at this point because they're trying to rationalize everything they can to agree with that progressive viewpoint. But there's still, like I said, there's a lot of people who are just sort of in the middle and kind of willing to hear both sides. They don't think about politics all the time. These are the people we're trying to reach. And so I think there's a lot of territory to be gained there. But so the way to change the culture is leadership. Leadership means fundamentally inspiring people, leading them towards greater ends. It's a difference between leadership and management. Like legislation is almost like the management side, right? It's making the trains run on time. It's doing the nitty gritty work. That's important too. But leadership is just as important. And leadership involves good communication skills and inspiring messages that inspire people to be greater than where they are today. The only way to be greater than you are today is to like literally take it upon yourself and engage in some personal responsibility. Personal responsibility is that bedrock of conservatism. Again, most Americans inherently understand this, but we've got to talk about it more.
There's a decent chance that we're going to have a Democratic president and a Republican-led Senate. So we're going to have divided government as we have a number of times in the past. What should we expect from divided government this time around? During the Obama years, you had tense standoffs over the debt ceiling. You had a government shutdown, very close to a default on US debt. Do you think that we're going to see that kind of brinksmanship in the coming years?
Yeah, I mean, it's a divided government will look a lot like those years, I believe. I'm thankful that it'll be divided and not in Democrat control. Under Democrat control, I think we could expect some very, very wild lurches to the left. Biden's already talking about some dangerous things, whether it's ceasing all deportations. To what end? Like, why? What? We just decide we don't want to enforce the law. I'm not sure what the reasoning is there. Getting back into the Paris Climate Accords. Again, this is nothing but a pro-China policy. As America has made itself cleaner, China continues to pollute, and now we want to enforce it, and now we want to continue to promote that nonsense. So, there's certain things that unfortunately they can do as an administration that will be detrimental, but it won't be nearly as detrimental as if they had the Senate also. And yeah, I think you can expect a lot of that. I think you can expect a lot of phone and pen type like executive actions, basically reversing a lot of what Trump did and applying some kind of twisted messaging to it. I think they go after the oil and gas industry in a big way. I think they're going to hurt our industry, and as a result, they're going to create higher carbon emissions globally. You know why? Because that energy demand just gets met by dirtier producers like Saudi and Russia. So, these genius environmentalist activists need to think before they act, but they don't. They act purely based on emotion and dogmatism. So they're going to do some of that via executive action, and there's going to be problems, but not as big as it would have been if we'd lost the Senate. So we need to win in Georgia. How about that? I'll be in Georgia, making sure we win.
A lot of COVID relief measures are set to expire with the end of the year. We now have 2 vaccine candidates that look very promising and that will be widely available beginning in the spring. How should we be thinking about COVID relief at this stage? Does this suggest to you that we ought to do something to kind of bridge the gap, or that we've already done too much and that we need to be mindful of how this might contribute to future debt?
I'm still in favor of a limited, targeted COVID relief package, basically what the Senate Republicans have proposed. I'm still in favor of that, even with because even with the vaccines coming, that news doesn't help the small businesses, and people still trying to pay off a mortgage or rent. And now these horrible leaders across the country, and they're all Democrats, are locking people down again and destroying people's livelihoods and acting like there's no trade-offs whatsoever. It's the American people need to rebel against this. They need to rebel against this. It's unbelievably bad science. It's unbelievably bad policy making. It's unbelievable we're even still having the conversation. We should have learned our lesson by now about lockdowns. The reason it's spreading is because people just have fatigue over it. People have stopped caring about it. Let's all just be honest about why there's increased spikes. It's because it's not that people don't know about the dangers of the virus. They know very well, and they engage in a probability risk assessment on their own, and they take actions on their own. This is what's happening. There's no way for government to stop that. It is not government's job to stop that. It is simply a reality. And living in reality might be a good new strategy for the COVID crisis. I think it's not just America making these mistakes; it's the entire world. Although, in some places in Europe are going back to lockdowns, some places aren't. I think we have to live with reality. I think we're going to put resources anywhere. It's towards expanding hospital capacity, and so that would obviously be a part of a COVID relief bill. Making sure that there's still funding for testing, making sure that we're funding some of these new technologies in testing too. There's much more rapid technologies available, some breathalyzers, for instance. It's like 30-second test. This is something I'm interested in. So there's things we can certainly do, but as usual, there's a bias towards extreme action because it makes you feel good, and that's unfortunately what many politicians jump to.
I know you have to jump off soon, so just one last question for you. There was a lot of talk this year about the defund the police movement and Black Lives Matter, 2 movements that are disproportionately urban. Right now, there aren't many cities where conservatives have power over public policy. How does that change, and does it need to? You represent a very suburban, urban district. I'm curious if you think there are ways that conservatives can make further inroads in urban America.
Yeah, a great question. I'm not sure I have a great answer. We just have to try more. I think messaging on this on this subject of law and order and stability and prosperity is a good one. Talking to the inner city communities about opportunity zones and job training opportunities and vocational training I think is a better message than, hey, we'll pay off your student debt, right? Because it's like, well, how do you even get into college? Think about who you're talking to. These people need a 6-month certification so they can get a job that actually pays $60,000, $70,000 a year. That's an appealing thing. Not some of this other nonsense coming from the progressive left. So, but the progressive left will always be better at appealing to these young white liberals living in these cities, and I think that's what's really turning a lot of the cities blue. because that's what's changed the most, right? This gentrification. So, but simply talking to them might be a good start. And you know, in the Houston area, it's we failed to do it this time. We'll work really hard next time. Is showing people, like, this is what happens when you elect liberal judges. In Texas, we elect judges. So this is what happens, right? And I can show you example after example of somebody who was let out when they shouldn't have been let out, and they committed another act of violence. And they're doing so not in our nice white neighborhoods. They're doing so in inner city neighborhoods, and they're hurting those communities. So this is what liberalism has in store for you. It's bad. It's terrible. I think we just have to keep showing people that over and over again, and try to change the narrative.
Congressman, thank you very much for your time. This has been a pleasure. Thanks to everyone for joining us. I encourage everyone in the audience to get a copy of Congressman Crenshaw's book, Fortitude, American Resilience in the Era of Outrage. It contains an important and clarifying message for all of us.
Appreciate you.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks to everybody. Bye.